Today's episode of Filmmaker U is brought to you by our sponsors OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. And it's also brought to you by our other sponsors, AJA. Make sure to check out aja.com so that you can see how they can help you in your post-production needs. Hi, I'm Gordon Raquel from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com or, of course, follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_u. Every week, we interview film professionals to discuss their work. And this week, I'm joined by Justin Joseph Hall, whose work includes Marcellus Hall, an artist in New York City, and Prologue, among many other great projects. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Nice to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
What would you say? So, because you do a lot of editing, but you're, as I said from your bio and as I mentioned here, you're a multimedia storyteller. So, what encompasses your work? Like, how would you define yourself as what a multimedia storyteller does?
Yeah, well, mostly I direct and edit, but I also do color and kind of help out wherever. I'm also, I don't just edit video, but I like to edit scripts. And so if people come to me and ask me to help out with something, I do because I concentrate on a lot of how stories are told, where to get the maximum impact on the story that you have. I like working with something that already exists and making it the best it possibly can be. And that's really just looking at the structure of the story. And I concentrate in video, but I also do some podcasts, not as much, more documentary podcasts, not as much direct storytelling stuff. And so it's really looking at the structure of a story and finding the impact points and how to build up towards those to get the audience the most engaged and have the most impact on whatever your media is trying to do. Whether that's I'm working on a stand-up special right now, making people laugh, get them involved, make people remember what you're saying.
So what would you say? Because we have a lot of young people watching these shows, these episodes that we're doing. What would you say? Some of the mistakes that you see in scripts that people should keep an eye out for?
Well, the first obvious thing is repetitiveness. I mean, that's like in any kind of editing, you're like, oh, they're saying the same thing twice. And I don't know how many times you tell people and they're like, oh, I'll change it. And then they like take it out and add it back in or whatever. But you really have to be, they say kill your darlings. But once you've finished, like the darling is the whole thing. You're not killing, you're making one thing. You're not creating individual pieces like an arm and two or three arms and then sticking it together. You're creating like an entity. And so you don't want to have these repeat parts. I'm actually not like, I never studied writing or anything because can't study everything. And I'm pretty technical with video and I study that a lot. So, but you just see when you're trying to find the impact, I always call it like the emotional arc of the story that you're creating. You want to always be pulling people towards something, whatever it is. You're pulling their attention, especially, people talk about, I don't think it really changes that much with all this media that we have now, but there's all these distractions or whatever, but it's a lot of times it's the distractions in your head, and you always have to be pulling people toward wherever you're going in your story. And if you're like saying, oh, saying the same thing 3 or 4 times, people are going to get bored and they're going to be upset that you're wasting their time. So you really need to concentrate on what you're saying. Say it once, say it the best way. There's a lot of good ways to say something. Say the one that you like the most and that helps the story the most, and move on. Don't come back to it later.
So what is it that attracts you to scripts?
I just love stories in general. I think I've been realizing, and my parents just told me this the other day. They're like, oh, you read a lot when you were a kid and all this stuff. And I just love stories, and I always visualize them very well in my head. And I kind of assumed everybody did that. And I think that you can learn so much. It's a way to learn empathy. Obviously, I think that's like one of the main reasons why people love stories. You can experience something in your mind without going through everything, and you really understand other people. And it's really the way that we communicate as a species with each other. And that's why you have huge impacts. When books came out, everybody was obsessed with that. Now we have videos and podcasts and all these things that tell different stories. and I'm kind of getting lost in what I was saying, but
No, well,
yeah.
it's what's interesting is, it seems that Hollywood is like caught up in the hero's journey, but there's so many ways to tell a story. Like, how do we get out of that when they're the ones producing or giving us the money to make these stories and are sort of stuck on that one style?
I think you got to show the different ways. If you
Yeah.
know that you're entertained, what is it? I think it was Tarantino said, "What make the film that you want to watch." So if you're not making something that you want to watch, there's a lot of people who like the same thing that you do out there. That's what you realize
Mhm.
over and over. You're not that unique. Okay, audiences are predictable. Okay, if you like something and you really like it, not just because you made it, but you would be like, I sat down and I watched this and I had nothing to do with it and I would like it, then there are going to be a lot of other people that also like it. And
Mhm.
I think if you do that, you find that audience who like the similar thing that you do, which that's tough. That's another whole side of telling stories is marketing and getting the word out there. But once you do find that, people notice. Once you have followers, that's when the money comes, because when people want to hear your stories, stories are worth money.
Mhm.
And that's something that has taken me forever to learn myself. But stories are worth money, and well told stories are worth a lot of money. So once you can learn how to tell a story a different way, or the way that you want to hear it,
Mhm.
then other people are going to want to hear that as well. I don't think it matters. There are prototypes that are set up because they're well known that they work, and you can't blame the people putting in, especially in film, where it's probably the most expensive art form, and it makes it very difficult to change things on a large scale. That's why you have independent cinema. That's where you get to experiment and do different things. But I think it's really showing that there's an audience, and those are two, showing that you can tell the story well, and then showing that there's an audience for the way that you tell the story, and then things come after that. It's a long, hard process, and that's why they say filmmaking is difficult.
Now, you you've done a lot of documentary work, and it's arguably one of the toughest forms of storytelling, considering you don't know what's coming. Right. So how do you like to tackle documentaries to crack the story?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Number one, the first part that you asked is like, documentaries are difficult, but I really like to do things where I'm collaging. Like I said, I like to have something that already exists and then form it into something. I kind of see
Mhm.
it as sculpting or whatever. So what I usually do is, I feel like first thing I do is I filter. I take in everything. You look at everything, or you have an assistant. I've used interns that at certain places where we had interns
Mhm.
that help me filter and organize everything. So then you just have the better section. You don't pay attention to the rest of the stuff. I mean, you can always go back to it, but probably you don't. Um, and then you filter it down, and you start putting it in places where you want things to be. And then you keep watching it and you keep watching it again. And eventually you see the story, and you felt the emotions of watching the long pieces of stuff, and you slowly get to the best moments, and you place it together. I mean, you put the glue where it needs to be for the whole story to fit together as a full piece.
Mhm.
And I really do think of it as sculpting, almost like you have this huge line of film of images, right? And you're cutting it down, like literally. That's what they used to do. Now we digitally cut, but you cut it down so you have a smaller piece, and you can start seeing the shape of this story. And once you see the shape of the story, then you need to seamlessly put together all of the pieces because you've cut it up. So then you have to put it back together and make it look very nice. And that's sort of how I attack documentaries, especially because it is very random what you're getting in, and depending on the film, I mean, it's very different. Some people, it depends when you're working with certain producers and directors, they'll be like, "Oh, I want it to look like a raccoon when you're done," and so you have to put it together to look like that. I'm using too many metaphors, maybe, but so then you put it in the form of a raccoon, okay, and then you piece it together as best as you can, and hopefully your material works like that. A lot of times I like just to see, like, oh, what does it best look as, and then you shape it around that. I think that's the easiest way to attack a documentary if I have my choice going into post production. So
Well, you worked on the series that I mentioned in my intro, Marcellus Hall, an artist in New York City. Can you tell us what's that series about, and also where can people check it out?
yeah, I just got a new announcement that is playing on the We Don't Even Know podcast, which is actually a podcast that I'm playing, that I've been a part of. We're on our 100th episode, and we're going to feature that in our 100th episode for a live screening. Um, that is later in the month. I forget the exact date. Let's say I have it here. February 22nd at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, but it's live stream around the world. And that project is really, I have a relative here. His name is Marcellus Hall. He's an amazing artist and illustrator. He's illustrated multiple covers for the New Yorker. He's done illustrations for the New York Times. Um, he's done 9 children's books. And then he's also a well-known musician in New York City. He's had indie success on Matador Records. He's traveled throughout the world, in Japan. He's had popularity and fame in Denmark and France and Germany, and he's gone all over. He's also inspired the song um, uh, "Float On" by Modest Mouse. Isaac Brock actually got a tattoo of his song called "Life Is Still Sweet" on his arm. And that's the name of Marcellus's song. So that's my documentary subject. And what it's really about is we're following the life of an artist in his creative career and seeing how you can make it in a creative career. Because I had all these questions, and I think that's a lot what your guys' podcasts is about. But I created this documentary. It's sort of like a masterclass where you get to see the visual art that this artist created. You hear the music, the audio art that he created, chronologically while he tells the story of his artist's career. And it has a lot of his personal, how his personal relationships affect his art, how what he's thinking about art affects his art, how he slowly became better in what he's doing, and where he had his successes. So that's the first installation of a greater series that I'm calling right now Artist in the City. This is the first one that we made. It's 5 episodes, 31 minutes, split up, for internet consumption. And yeah.
What are the plans for the next ones? Because that sounds interesting. It sounds.
Yeah, so the main thing that's interesting about it is that we're telling it chronologically with visual and audio art, and so what we have to do is find people who have done that for their whole career. There's one other person who said that she's interested so far, and we're doing research on different folks, and we're looking for funding. Her name is Kat Pierce of the Pierces. She's a pretty well established indie musician, and she also does a lot of visual arts. She just released a whole deck of tarot cards that she created. And she's been doing art since she was little. And we also sort of focused the series on where people have lived. She, in particular, has gone from like New York to London to LA. And, Mars has been in New York his whole career. But yeah, and then we're looking for other artists. I won't name everybody. I mean, our ideal artist that we would love to get would be like a Joni Mitchell, would be amazing. But that'll prove difficult.
How did you, so going back to our story discussion, how did you structure your story over the 5 episodes? Because I think about, one of the things that frustrates me with Netflix right now is that at the end it's always like we got to hook them for the next episode, but it's also kind of a necessity in the world we're in because there's so much media. So how did you structure your 5 episodes?
Oh yeah, I think hooking him for the next episode, I don't know if you always have to leave him on a cliffhanger or whatever, but I think it is important because unless you're doing like a sitcom, where you want to have a nice tie-up or whatever, but if you're telling a story that's longer, you're not done telling the story, and you're still pulling at them to get to what you're saying, so you want them to move on. But the way that I structured this, I do things a lot more. Because it's a documentary, like I said, I really separate production from post-production. So a lot of times I go out and I get things, and I know that I'm going to sift through it and do my filtering and rebuilding afterwards and piecing it together. So I went out and I knew all of the interesting things. Mars is a good friend of mine. We used to talk all the time, and so I knew a lot of the stories that I found interesting. And like I said, if you find something interesting and you want to see it on screen, other people are going to want to see it as well. So I went out and I got those things. I got him to tell those stories, and I asked him questions that I had always wanted to ask him. We got that, and I had separated it by different sections in his life.
Mhm.
He had obvious markers. His bands never really overlapped. He kind of did one band, and then within a 1 or 2 year span, he did the next band, and then whatever. So I, from the beginning, separated by these different sections that were obvious in his artwork, because I know that we're focusing on his art in the piece. And so it's not a standard structure, because there's no arc. I'm not setting up a conflict in his life. There's really no conflict in the whole thing. But what you see, I mean, you see an internal conflict. It's not like there's nothing there, but it's really pulling from moment to moment as you're reliving his life through his artwork. So it's just a constant, like, oh, you want to continue having this conversation with this interesting person the whole time. He's being very honest with you, which Mars is very honest when you sit down and talk to him. But he usually doesn't talk in big groups and different stuff. He really likes talking one-on-one. He doesn't like going into a bar and having 100 people come across. But in this medium, what we can do is sit and talk with him, and it's like having a conversation with him, but you're going through this journey. You're traveling with him through his life and through his memories. So that's sort of how it's structured. And at the end, I would always set up, like, if we know we're starting the next band or something, I would find an end of an episode, as you asked. I would be like, let's move on to how did you start the next band, or what were you anticipating next in your career? And that's how I would sort of end the episode. It's not like a huge hook, but it's something just to, again, just keep pulling them on your journey, on the storytelling journey.
Now, you said he was an artist and he did some New Yorker covers. It looks like you have a New Yorker cartoon on your door there. Is that am I
That is
accurate?
actually his art, but it is not.
Yeah.
That's the poster that we did for it.
Okay, that's what I was gonna
have
ask.
another
Was that
one here?
his?
Let me pull it up over here. Yes, it is. I have a few things here. So this is. I can show you. Actually, he has one that's the poster is over here, but this is. We used it as a poster for the second episode. If you see this, it's a. It actually, I don't know if he ever published this. So a lot of our stuff, some of it, I don't think it ever seen the light of day. It's not focusing well, I don't think, but it's a very complex photo with a lot of things going on in the Lower East Side.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's one of our covers. And then like his poster, I don't know if people see this podcast, but he does very complex. Sorry, I'm being away from the mic, but
No worries.
I'm just pulling out the poster. He mostly does ink and watercolor. And so this one, I don't think was ever, I think he might have won an award for this one, but I don't think you can see this is a very New Yorker kind of style. And that's all watercolor. You look at that insane detail with the lines without actually having lines, and, the circle. I mean, it's amazing. I don't do watercolor, but, I think everybody's tried it in school. And if you think about how this was done, I've seen him do it, so I kind of know, but it's amazing. He's got people down here, and I mean, so many shapes that are perfectly defined. It's because he's been doing it for 30, 40 years. I mean, he's pretty incredible. So this is our movie poster. You can check it out on our website if you guys can't see it here, but.
No, your style, like when I was watching your style with the interview, was very Errol Morris. Like, is that an influence in that?
Yes, directly. Yes, Fog of War is one of my favorite films, and this is directly. I would say the two influences for this film that were the most is two things that I always wanted to do. Is the Errol Morris, where you sit down and interview one person. That's like what this is, and then like old Dr. Seuss cartoons where they would do, the Ken Burns effect pan and scan on illustrations. So those are the two main influences on creating this documentary. But yeah, Earl Morris is the best at, like, you sit down and have a conversation, you pull out the best parts of it. This guy's very interesting. You don't say why, you just show it, So
Now, did you use the Interatron? Or did
no, I
you?
had pretty much looked exactly like I look on this podcast
Yeah,
with my 5D, which was behind me before,
yeah.
but I shot everything. I only own a 5D that I bought a long time ago, and sitting on a chair and put a lav on him. And we had a couple tiny reflectors and like one light that
Hmm.
I won't go into what I did with the lighting, but very simple. It's
Yeah.
basically us just sitting in a room on chairs, no fancy gadgets that Errol Morris can afford.
What do you do to get people comfortable to open up? Because that's one of the tricky things with documentaries is you got to get someone comfortable. Like, I mean, in this case, it's a relative, but
Yeah,
in
this was
your other
easier.
movies.
It's easier than most things that I've done because I have a relationship with him. So I went into the room with an existing relationship of he actually part of the thing in the story we cut out at the end, but he came and visited me
Hmm.
in California when I was a baby. I was born out there. I was from Minnesota originally, but my dad was in the Air Force, and so we've known each other. He's known me my whole life. I've known him since I was alive, and we got to know each other really well when I moved to New York. But I mean, normally what I do is I don't have a lot of crew on it, so I'm doing a lot of things. So I think people sort of are sitting a lot of times around while I'm messing with stuff, and I might talk to them, and a lot of times I'm always apologizing to them, which I think makes them feel like it's not that formal, and I
Hmm.
think that makes people feel more normal, and and so I just talk to them like I would talk to anybody. I have questions about. I mean, this other documentary I'm doing, Frames of Reference. That's the other one that I'm thinking about because that's where I've done the most interviews, and I basically am setting up stuff. I a lot of times work alone or with one person, and I'm talking to them and asking them questions about what I want to know about the situation they're in. I mean,
Hmm.
you have a subject that you're working around, and you just have if you have a natural inquisitiveness, and if you've done a little bit of research on stuff, you're gonna want to know what they have to say about the subject, and that's what your audience is gonna want to know. So I just always take it like a conversation, like you're gonna tell me the things that I want to know. That's why I came here, you know. So we're just talking like I would with anybody if we were just having coffee or if we're just chatting on a podcast or whatever, you know.
Now, you mentioned before that the idea of the series is sort of to understand how to live a life as an artist because it's a difficult career choice. What were some of the things you learned from him? Because again, we're going to have lots of young people who want to live a life as an artist. And so, what did you learn that you think
You're
you know?
I think I and it's through him he helped me realize because I had a lot of questions about and I learned a lot of this stuff before I started this series. So I'm just thinking is taking time to answer this because I want to go back to that because that's what I put on. And the main questions that I had for him is like, how do you earn money? What should I do? How should I go about? Um, what should I charge? When should I stick up for myself? And I think the main thing is like your work and your talent is worth something. You should basically always charge, and you should have you don't need to do a starting rate. You know, I mean, it's one thing to work on if you're working on projects to build your resume, they better be projects that you believe in and you really want to do because you can do those for free. But when you're getting other people to hire you, you don't want to do stuff for free because people take advantage of you if you just are working just to work. And it's
Mhm.
very difficult because that's a lot of what I did. And I learned a lot of technical stuff in the process of doing that because I'm always trying to fix stuff and not getting paid enough for it. Um, but I think the main thing is know that you are worth something no matter what skill level you're at, and you should get paid something for what you're doing, and it should be a decent hourly whatever. Otherwise, it's not really worth your time unless you're getting something out of it. Unless you're also learning, like if you're never done After Effects, but you're going to learn on the job and somebody's going to pay you $200 for it, you might want to take that one because then you can have the time to learn it
Mhm.
and get paid a little bit. It's a free school that you're teaching yourself. But if you've like have some kind of skill, or if you're a PA, you don't just want to go do PA work for a movie that nobody's going to see and that you don't care about. You know, you don't want to be underpaid for that kind of stuff. You need to be
Mhm.
picky from the beginning and not waste your time doing whatever. And Mars is very good at that. Bring it back to the original question, because he knows he needs time to think. He needs time to go out. He's not going to do projects that waste his time like that, because he has something to say, and that's the most important thing to him. And that's the difference between I think an independent artist or whatever and a commercial artist, because you can always do whatever anybody wants and make money eventually when you're in the film industry for a while. Sorry, that's a long-winded answer, I feel like, but
I have one last question for you. We've been stuck in this pandemic for quite a while, and a lot of people have turned to streaming services for entertainment when they get locked in. Is there a show or a movie you've discovered over the past 2 years that you think people should check out if they're stuck
oh,
inside?
yeah, the COVID, my favorite one that I saw over COVID is definitely A Portrait of a Lady on Fire. It was
Okay.
amazing, and that's like not very unique of me saying that, especially as an independent film, but the film is amazing. It's a French movie. It is beautiful. It is different storytelling. It is slow paced. It is sexy. It is the way they use music is Celine Chama is her name, the director. It is incredible, the impact that the music has in this film, and I've never seen a movie quite like it, and that's definitely the best movie I've seen since COVID started.
Well, thank you so much for letting us interview today.
For sure, thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
And that's our episode for today. Make sure to check out filmmakeru.com for all our latest courses. Of course, you can follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_u. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching. Today's episode of Filmmaker U is brought to you by our sponsors, OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. And it's also brought to you by our other sponsors, AJA. Make sure to check out aja.com so that you can see how they can help you in your post-production needs.